Chris is a young black man who is about to meet his white girlfriend's family. At first, he believes that the overly loving behavior on the part of her family is an attempt to deal with the two's relationship. Over time, Chris realizes that his girlfriend's family is hiding something much more disturbing and that the only way out is to escape. Watch now the summary of the movie Get Out. The beginning. The beginning is a black photographer who reluctantly agrees to meet the family of his white girlfriend, Rose. Being concerned that his girlfriend's parents don't know he's black, the girl claims he's her first black boyfriend and assures him that her parents are not racists. During the drive to the country estate of Rose's family, Chris talks on his cell phone to his friend Rod, a TSA agent who has been put in charge of taking care of the photographer's dog. His friend ends up jokingly saying that it's dumb for him to agree to go to a white girl's parents' house alone. Suddenly on the road, while being distracted by their conversation, Rose ends up running over a deer on the way. After the collision with the animal, Chris seems to have been particularly affected by it, quickly reporting the crash to the police. When the authorities arrive on the scene, a white officer asks for Chris' identification even though he wasn't the one behind the wheel, which ends up making Rose angry and intervening by saying that the cop is being racist, which makes the officer reconsider his actions and let the couple go. The family. When they arrive at his girlfriend's parents' property, neurosurgeon Dean and hypnotherapist Missy are very receptive to their daughter's new boyfriend, although the father makes some disconcerting comments while trying to be overly nice. Dean then decides to show the house to his new son-in-law, and as they talk, he talks about his father being an athlete who lost a race to Jesse Owens, a famous black athlete who won several medals in the qualification rounds for the 1936 Olympics. Soon after, he introduces the black servants of the house, Georgina and Walter. Realizing that Chris thought it was odd to have only black employees working for them, Dad quickly states that he would vote for Obama a third time if he could. After the tour of the entire house, everyone went to chat on the porch while sipping iced tea. The black waitress who is serving Chris gets distracted and accidentally makes his drink spill on the table. The woman apologizes and soon leaves after her girlfriend's mother suggests that she go to bed, as she must have been a bit tired. Still sipping tea, Jeremy, his girlfriend's younger brother, arrives and joins the group. Later that same day, during dinner, everyone seems to be having fun with family stories told by Jeremy until he insists on wanting to fight with Chris, who denies the request several times. After dinner, with the two inside her room, about to go to sleep, Rose expresses to Chris her indignation at the embarrassing attitudes of her relatives. The boy tries to comfort her and tells her not to worry. After trying and failing to sleep, the photographer goes outside the house to smoke. When he's about to put a cigarette in his mouth, he sees a human figure in the shadows of the night running towards him. When the figure approaches, he realizes it is the employee, who, without saying anything at all, diverts the trajectory of his path so as not to collide and continues running. Startled by all he is seeing, he turns toward the house and notices that another maid is standing inside in front of a window, seemingly admiring her own reflection in the glass. Frightened once again by what he saw, he no longer wants to smoke and decides to go back to his room, at which point he is approached by his mother-in-law in the therapy room. The woman warns him about the dangers of smoking and invites the young man to sit with her for a while. Missy then picks up a cup of tea and begins stirring the drink with a spoon, making a repetitive friction sound. They start talking about hypnotherapy, but the mother-in-law decides to quickly change the subject by asking about the death of her son-in-law's mother. Chris reluctantly tells how he was a child and was at home watching TV when his mother was hit by a car. Growing increasingly annoyed by the questions, he reveals that he has not taken any action regarding his mother's accident. Feeling very uncomfortable and with tears in his eyes, he realizes that he can't move. And then he realizes that the woman has hypnotized him with the sound of the spoon hitting the teacup. The mother-in-law then tells him to sink to the ground, and with these words she makes Chris feel as if he is falling into a dark place, somewhere that looks underwater, in which he can only see and hear the outside world from afar, but without being able to move any part of his physical body. His wife says he's in a sunken place now, and out of nowhere he wakes up the next day believing that everything that happened was just a bad dream. After getting out of bed, as usual in his routine, he decides to go for a smoke, but realizes he has no interest in it anymore. Eventually he changes his mind and decides to go take a breather and walk around the outside areas of the property. Once again, Chris ends up seeing through a window the maid looking at herself in the mirror, it appearing as if she is checking something on her forehead. Putting that aside, he decides to go to the caretaker and has a strange conversation with him, with the man apologizing for the scare he gave him last night, confirming that he really was in his mother-in-law's office last night and that it wasn't a nightmare. Upon returning to his room, he finds his cell phone disconnected from the charger, unlike how he had left it. Chris comments to his girlfriend that he thinks he may have been hypnotized by his mother the night before, as well as telling her about the weirdness with the house staff. Rose says it may have been all in his head, as it made no sense at all. The auction. The next day, several luxurious cars bring dozens of wealthy white people to an annual feast hosted by the family. Many of the guests, almost all of whom are middle-aged or elderly, show a great deal of interest in Chris, making several compliments on the photographer's appearance and physique, as well as making unsensible comments about African Americans. Eventually, to his surprise, he runs into what appears to be the only black man among the party guests, Logan King. When he approaches Logan, he soon realizes that he is behaving very strangely. Although he is young, close to his age, he reveals that he is married to a white woman much older than him. As he walks away from the crowds at the party, he ends up meeting Jim Hudson, a blind art dealer who, thanks to an assistant who describes visual works in great detail, says he is an admirer of his photographic work. After talking to the old blind man, Chris returns to the house and passes by several guests talking among themselves. As he walks up the stairs, he does not notice that the guests immediately fall silent and pay close attention to his footsteps upstairs. In the room where he is staying, he finds his cell phone again disconnected from the charger. Suspecting that the maid is responsible for this, he shares with his girlfriend the fact that happened. Rose, again, doesn't seem to believe him. When he manages to turn on his cell phone, he quickly calls his friend from the TSA and tells him about the hypnosis and the strange behavior of the relatives and visitors. Telling Rod everything that is going on in that place, his friend tells him to get the hell out of there, claiming that his mother hypnotizes black people to turn them into sex slaves. Finishing his call, he is surprised by the maid, who apologizes for disconnecting his cell phone, claiming it was an accident. During the conversation, the woman begins to laugh as tears fall from her eyes, doing so as she states that everyone in the house are great people and treat her like family. After the strange conversation with the maid, he decides to return to the party, where he meets his father-in-law, who introduces him to more guests. One of them asks Chris if he thought it was more advantageous or disadvantageous to be African American in the current era. Intrigued by this, the photographer passes the question to the other black man, who claims to have a very good African American experience most of the time. As he continues to talk, Chris decides to discreetly photograph him with his cell phone to show Rod, but forgets to turn off the camera flash, which causes the man to immediately stop talking and assume an expression of deep sadness as his nose begins to bleed. The man quickly turns to Chris and tells him to get out. Startled, the same man apologizes, thinking he might have offended him in some way. Even with his apologies, the boy grabs him by the clothes as he starts hysterically screaming and crying to get the hell out of there. Dean quickly takes him to the therapy room and then explains that the flash caused the man to have an epileptic attack. Time later, the same boy leaves the room, much calmer, and begins to thank the hypnotherapist for calming him down. Around the same time, the owner of the house beckons the guests to go and play bingo while Rose takes her boyfriend to a secluded place to talk. Away from the house, Chris tells his girlfriend that he doesn't believe the guy had an epileptic seizure and that they should leave that place. While Rose and Chris are away, the father-in-law quietly conducts an auction with a photo of the photographer, showing as if he is the person being auctioned off. Participants use bingo cards to place bids. Jim, the old blind guy Chris chatted with earlier, comes out as the winner. Meanwhile, Chris returns home with his girlfriend and sends the photo he took of the man to his friend, who almost immediately recognizes Logan as Andre, an acquaintance of theirs. But as they debate Andre's weirdness, the battery on his cell phone runs out. Looking for the outlet, he quickly notices the door of a closet being ajar and finds romantic photos of his girlfriend with other black people, including the two current employees of the house. He immediately remembers his girlfriend's contradiction in stating that he was the girl's first black boyfriend. Seeing this and all the strange moments he had in that place, he quickly tries to leave, but is approached by the other family members, who act very shady. Jeremy then tries to assault him, but Chris manages to dodge an attack and starts yelling at his girlfriend for the car keys. But in that same moment, Rose finally reveals that she never intended to let him go. Frightened, Chris tries to attack the girl's brother in order to try and escape from the place, but the mother ends up hypnotizing him by hitting the teacup with a spoon, causing him to fall back into the sunken place. Unable to resist and hypnotized, Chris blacks out and everyone in the house helps carry his body somewhere in the basement. At this very moment, his friend Rod, worried, calls his friend numerous times, but since his cell phone is dead, he receives no return. While taking care of the dog, he begins to do some research on Andre and discovers that he was reported missing some time ago. The surgery. Upon waking from hypnosis in a room in the underground of the house, Chris realizes that he is tied to an armchair in front of an old television set. The device starts playing a video recording of an elderly man, the girlfriend's paternal grandfather. In the video, it says the viewer was chosen because of their physical advantages and that, together with their family, they could be part of something perfect. When talking about something called coagula procedure, the old man describes it as a human miracle created by an order that the family is a part of and that has been perfected by them. When the old man joins the others in the family in the video, he suggests that eventually, the viewer might enjoy being part of the family. While all this is going on, Rod goes to the police and tells them everything he knows about the events that are happening to his friend and about Andre's disappearance. While Rod tries to help, Chris is still tied to the armchair. He starts to see the television turn on again, and this time allowing him to communicate with the man who bought him at the auction, only this time he's looking completely different. Jim says that Chris was lucky to be seduced by Rose, as his brother Jeremy's methods of capture are far more unpleasant. He goes on to say that the conversation between them at that moment is a kind of psychological preoperative session, as he is about to have a complicated surgery. The buyer's brain will be partially transplanted into his body, while his consciousness will live permanently in a sunken place, fully controlling the motor functions of Chris' body. The purpose of that surgery is to put that old blind man into a new young body. Saddened by it all, the photographer finally understands why all the other black people he encountered acted in such disturbing ways. This was due to the fact that their bodies were being controlled by brains forcefully transplanted from old white people, while their true consciousnesses lived trapped in a sunken place. Chris soon starts questioning why only black people have been the victims of the coagula procedure. The old man then says he's not sure, but assumes it's the people's desire for change. He talks about some wanting to become stronger, faster, and even cooler. But the old man claims he doesn't care what color Chris is. What he really wants would be the eyes the young man has for photography. The broadcast ends and Chris realizes that he was unconsciously scratching the arms of the armchair, to the point of tearing the chair and causing the cotton to come out of it. The television is turned back on and a video of the teacup hypnosis apparently causes him to go unconscious. Sometime later, in an operating room, the father of his girlfriend, assisted by his son, begins the surgery. Dean asks the boy to go get Chris. Jeremy then leaves the room to go get the newest guinea pig. Upon arriving in the room, he is surprised by Chris attacking him, leaving him unconscious and bleeding on the floor. The photographer shows that he was only able to get out of hypnosis because he removed the cottons from the rips in the couch and put them in his ear. Taking notice of his son's delay, Dean leaves the operating room to check on him, but is surprised by Chris, who hits him with the antlers of a deer head, which was used as decoration for the room. Dean, upon dropping dead, knocks over a candle in the operating room, which starts a house fire. The escape. Returning to the house's first floor, Chris finds the maid, who is terrified and runs away. He then runs into his girlfriend's mother, who tries to grab the cup of tea to hypnotize him, but he reaches for the cup first, knocking it to the floor, causing it to break. The woman still tries to attack him with scissors, but he resists the scissors and manages to kill her. Upon reaching the front door, Chris is attacked again by Jeremy, who starts to fistfight him, but he manages to wound him using the scissors and finally kill the man. On his way out of the house, Chris steals a car. While driving and trying to escape, he calls the police, but ends up running over the maid, who throws herself in front of the car. This causes him to remember the death of his mother, making him decide to not to run away this time. Chris quickly carries the unconscious body into the car. The maid, who actually hosts the brain of Rose's grandmother, wakes up and starts attacking Chris, making him crash the car and causing the old woman to die. Getting out of the car, the photographer tries to flee on foot, but suddenly Rose arrives on the scene armed with a rifle. She pursues him with the waiter, who is actually her grandfather. When they manage to knock Chris down, he manages to use the flash of his cell phone to make the real manservant able to control his own body once again. The servant takes the rifle from his granddaughter and shoots her in the guts. Soon after, he commits suicide by shooting himself in the head. Realizing the woman is still alive and reaching for the rifle, Chris quickly stops her and starts to choke her, but gives up. Seconds later, a vehicle arrives on the scene. Rose then calls for help thinking it was the same white cop from days ago, and Chris, also thinking it was, immediately raises his arms in surrender, but they are surprised by the vehicle turning out to be from TSA, and the driver is his friend Rod, who finally managed to find out where he was and went to rescue him. Chris then gets into the vehicle and drives away, leaving his seriously injured girlfriend on the ground. And that was the movie today. We want to know from you, what did you think of the movie? Say it all here in the comments. We'll be reading all of them, and we want to know what's the next movie you want to see here on our channel for us to summarize.